It is 7:17 in the morning, June 30th, 1908. In a remote stretch of Siberia, a farmer named S.B. Semenov steps outside his home near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River. The air is still, the forest is quiet. Then the sky splits in two. A column of blue fire erupts across the horizon, brighter than the sun. The ground shakes. A shockwave tears through the air with a sound like artillery fire. Windows shatter hundreds of miles away. People are knocked clean off their feet. When it was over, 80 million trees had been flattened across 830 square miles of forest. And there was no crater, no fragments, no explanation. This is the Tunguska Event, the largest explosion in recorded human history. And more than a century later, scientists are still piecing together exactly what happened. To understand just how powerful this explosion was, you need a reference point. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, the weapon that leveled an entire city and killed 140,000 people, released the energy equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT. The Tunguska explosion released the energy equivalent of 15 million tons of TNT, 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. If that same explosion had occurred over London, Paris, or New York, the entire city would have ceased to exist in an instant. The shock wave alone registered on seismic instruments across Russia. Barometric pressure changes were recorded as far away as England. The night skies over Europe glowed for several days afterward, so bright that people in London reported being able to read newspapers outside at midnight. Something had hit the Earth's atmosphere with almost incomprehensible force, and because it struck one of the most remote, uninhabited regions on the planet, almost no one noticed. The region around Tunguska was sparsely populated, but those who were there left behind accounts that are difficult to dismiss. S.B. Semenov, the farmer who witnessed the explosion from roughly 40 miles away, described seeing the sky tear apart and fire spreading across the forest canopy. The heat was so intense, he said it felt as though his shirt was on fire. He was thrown from where he stood by the shockwave. 50 miles from ground zero, members of the Evenki, the indigenous people of central Siberia, were thrown from their horses. One Evenki man told investigators that his relative had been pasturing over 1,500 reindeer in the area. When he returned after the blast, all that remained were charred carcasses. His storage sheds, equipment, clothing, all of it had been vaporized. The local Evenki had a name for what they believed had caused it. They called it Ogdi, a god of thunder and fire who had come down from the sky to punish those who violated sacred ground. For decades, many refused to return to the site. These were not fringe accounts. They were recorded by scientists. And they all told the same story, a flash from the sky, followed by an explosion of world-ending scale. Here is where the story gets strange. Despite the scale of the event, the shock waves, the seismic readings, the glowing skies across Europe, no formal scientific investigation reached the site for nearly 20 years. World War I broke out. Then came the Russian Revolution, then Civil War. The explosion in Siberia was simply not a priority. It wasn't until 1927, 19 years after the event, that a Russian mineralogist named Leonid Kulik finally convinced the Soviet Academy of Sciences to fund an expedition. Getting there was extraordinarily difficult. The site was so remote that Kulik and his team had to travel by train, then by horse, then on foot through freezing marshland. Local guides who knew the area refused to go anywhere near the blast zone. When Kulik finally arrived, what he found stunned him. 80 million trees, flattened in a precise radial pattern, all pointing outward from a central point, like spokes on a wheel. The destruction stretched in every direction as far as he could see. It took days to cross the full blast zone on foot. But at the very center, directly beneath the point of the explosion, the trees were still standing. They were stripped bare of branches and bark. but they were upright. This told Kulik something critical. The explosion had come from directly above, not from the ground. Whatever caused this had detonated in the sky. And when his team searched the ground for a crater, they found nothing. No crater, no meteorite fragments, no physical evidence of any object striking the Earth. The absence of a crater launched over a century of competing theories, some serious, some less so. The current scientific consensus is that Tunguska was caused by a rocky asteroid estimated to have been around 160 to 200 feet across that entered Earth's atmosphere at roughly 33,500 miles per hour. As it plunged downward, the immense atmospheric pressure and friction caused it to superheat and detonate mid-air, roughly 3 to 6 miles above the ground. The explosion vaporized the object entirely, which explains why no crater or physical fragments were ever found. It essentially ceased to exist before hitting the Earth. This type of event is called an airburst, and computer modeling of the blast pattern, the shape of the destroyed zone, the standing trees at the epicenter, the seismic recordings fits this explanation well. But not every scientist was satisfied. Some researchers argued the culprit was a comet rather than a rocky asteroid, a ball of ice and rock that would also largely vaporize on impact, leaving no debris behind. Supporting this theory, in the days following Tunguska, rare glowing cloud formations were observed across European skies. These are thought to form when large quantities of ice crystals enter the upper atmosphere suddenly. However, no chemical signature consistent with a comet was ever confirmed in the soil. And then there are the theories that sit at the edges of mainstream science. One theory proposed that a miniature black hole had passed through the Earth, entering in Siberia and exiting somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Scientists found no evidence to support this. Another suggested a collision with a chunk of antimatter, which would also leave no physical trace. Again, no evidence. Perhaps the most persistent fringe theory involves Nikola Tesla. In 1908, Tesla was known to be experimenting with long-range wireless energy transmission from his Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island. Some researchers pointed out that the Tunguska explosion occurred around the same time Tesla reportedly sent a transmission, and that Tesla himself later hinted an experiment had gone wrong. There is no credible evidence linking Tesla to Tunguska. But the timing and the mystery have kept the theory alive for over a century. Here is the part of the Tunguska story that scientists find most sobering. The asteroid that caused this explosion, an object estimated at 160 to 200 feet wide, was never detected before it hit. We had no warning. We didn't even investigate the aftermath for 20 years. In 2013, over a century after Tunguska, a much smaller asteroid, roughly 60 feet wide, exploded over the Russian city of Chelyabinsk. It was also undetected before entry. The shockwave injured over 1,500 people and damaged 7,000 buildings. And it was a fraction of the size of whatever hit Tunguska. In response to events like these, NASA established the Planetary Defense Coordination Office and in 2022 successfully tested the DART mission, a spacecraft that deliberately collided with an asteroid to alter its trajectory. The first real-world test of humanity's ability to deflect a space object. It worked, but scientists are clear. We are still cataloging thousands of near-Earth objects, and we do not know the location of every rock that could one day be on a collision course with our planet. Tunguska hit an empty forest. The next one may not. On June 30th, 1908, something arrived from space and detonated with the force of 1,000 nuclear weapons over an empty forest in Siberia. No one died in large numbers. No city was lost. History moved on, but the trees still lie where they fell. And scientists still debate the details of exactly what happened that morning. What we know for certain is this: it happened once, it will happen again. The only question is where. That's the Tunguska Event. If you want to go deeper on the stories that history left unanswered, subscribe to Horizon Archives. We'll be back next week.